You are a Roman guard standing outside a sealed stone chamber in Alexandria. Inside that room is Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, Pharaoh, descendant of the Ptolemies, the most powerful woman in the ancient world. She has been locked inside for 7 days. You hear her sometimes, not crying, not screaming, just movement, soft footsteps on stone, the faint rustle of fabric. Occasionally her voice speaking as if someone else is there, though you know for certain she is alone. Before we go any further, there is something you need to understand about Cleopatra's death. Everything you think you know about it is wrong. The romantic story of the asp hidden in a basket of figs is likely fiction. The image of Cleopatra dying peacefully in her royal bed, surrounded by loyal handmaidens, is almost certainly fiction. The heat of the first day of August hung heavy over Alexandria, a suffocating blanket that smelled of distant smoke and the salt of the great harbor. Outside, the city was holding its breath, waiting for the march of Octavian's legions. But inside the high limestone walls of the queen's unfinished mausoleum, the air was cold and smelled of old stone and fresh terror. The building was a fortress near the Temple of Isis, with massive cedar doors barred from the inside, designed to keep the living out and the dead in. I pressed my back against the rough shadows of the upper chamber, making myself as small as possible. I am Eleni, 14 years old, a girl with hands stained by the herbs I mix for the palace baths, usually unnoticed. And today, I wished to be invisible. Pull! The voice was raw, unrecognizable. It belonged to Cleopatra. I dared to peek from behind the pillar. The Queen of Kings, usually a vision of gold and composure, was unrecognizable. Her royal linen chiton was torn at the shoulder, her hair wild and matted with dust. She was leaning dangerously out of the high window of the upper floor, her hands gripping a thick, rough hemp rope. Beside her were her 2 shadows. Eris, the taller handmaiden with the fierce loyalty of a guard dog, was gritting her teeth so hard I could hear them grind. Carmian, the gentle one who usually arranged the queen's diadem, was weeping silently, her knuckles white as she hauled on the line. "He is too heavy," Carmian sobbed, her feet slipping on the stone floor. "We do not stop," Cleopatra hissed. "We do not let them take him." At the end of that rope, dangling against the outer wall 2 stories down, was Mark Antony, the Roman general, the man who had divided the world for her. I crept closer, unable to look away from the horror. As they heaved, the rope creaking in protest, I saw him come over the sill. He was a ruin of a man. He had fallen on his sword, a Roman act of honor meant to end his life before capture. But the blade had failed to kill him cleanly. He was a dead weight of muscle and armor, his tunic soaked in dark, viscous fluid. As the women dragged him over the stone ledge, a smear of bright crimson painted the white wall, a violent mark that would never be scrubbed away. They collapsed backward, hauling his massive frame onto the floor. The queen did not care about the blood ruining her robes. She crawled over him, her hands trembling as she touched his face. "Antony," she whispered. The name sounded like a prayer. The Roman opened his eyes. They were glassy, losing the light of the world. He tried to speak, perhaps to ask for wine, or to tell her he had died with honor, as Romans do. They believe death is better than chains. But here, in this cold tomb, there was no glory. There was only the wet, metallic smell of iron and the desperate gasps of a dying man. "Do not, pity me," he wheezed, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. Cleopatra let out a sound I will never forget. It was not a scream. It was a low, guttural wail that started in her chest and tore its way out of her throat. She beat her chest with her fists, tearing at her own skin as if physical pain could distract her from the soul-breaking grief. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to bring water, a cloth, anything to stop the bleeding. but fear froze my feet. I saw the transformation happen right there in the dust. The goddess Isis, the Pharaoh, the most powerful woman in the world, dissolved. In her place sat a widow, small and broken, her hands covered in the blood of the man she loved. Antony took one last, shuddering breath, and then he was just meat and bone. The silence that followed was heavier than the stone walls around us. Night had fallen over Alexandria, but it brought no peace. The darkness inside the mausoleum was thick and suffocating, smelling of dried blood and the cloying, sweet scent of burning oil from the few lamps we had left flickering. Time had lost its meaning. It might have been hours or mere moments since the great Antony had breathed his last, his body now covered by a fine linen sheet that was slowly turning rust-colored where it touched his wounds. I sat in the corner, my knees pulled to my chest, trying to become part of the stone. I am Eleni, the shadow in the room, the girl who grinds the lapis lazuli for the queen's eyelids and mixes the valerian root for her sleep. Tonight, there would be no sleep. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't empty, it was heavy, filled with the ragged breathing of the queen. Cleopatra sat on the floor beside the body of her lover. She had not moved. Her hands, usually adorned with rings of gold and jasper, were stained dark red. She looked at them as if they belonged to a stranger. Iris and Charmian, the two handmaidens who were more like sisters to her than servants, paced the small upper chamber. They were listening. We all knew they were coming. The city outside was too quiet. The Roman legions were not known for their silence. They were a machine of iron and hobnailed boots. Then, we heard it. Not a battering ram against the great cedar doors below, but a soft, rhythmic scraping against the outer stone wall. Scrape, clink, scrape. It was the sound of metal hooks finding purchase on limestone. "They are here," Iris whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Cleopatra's head snapped up. The grief in her eyes vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, hard glint of the cobra. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the blood on her torn robes. She rushed to the high window, the same window through which we had hauled the dying Antony only hours before. The window we had thought was our salvation was now a breach. "Bar the window," she commanded, but it was too late. Two hands gloved in leather gripped the stone sill. Then a helmet, crested with horsehair, rose into the lamplight. It was followed by another and another. They poured into the room like black water, silent and deadly efficient. These were not common infantry. These were the elite, men chosen for a specific task. Leading them was a man who did not look like a soldier, though he wore the armor of a Roman equestrian. He was Proculus. He was not a large man, but he carried himself with a terrifying, coiled stillness. His face was clean-shaven, his eyes the color of slate, calculating and devoid of warmth. He did not look at the dead Roman general on the floor. He did not look at the trembling handmaidens. His eyes locked onto Cleopatra. "Queen," Proculus said. His voice was calm, almost polite. It was the voice of a man speaking to a valuable horse he intended to break. "Caesar sends his greetings." The insult was sharp enough to cut, to speak of Caesar, Octavian. Here, in the presence of the true Caesar's son's mother, in the presence of Antony's corpse. Cleopatra did not speak. Her hand moved with the speed of a striking viper. She reached into the folds of her sash and pulled out a dagger. It was a small blade, the handle encrusted with emeralds, meant for ceremonial sacrifice, but sharp enough to end a life. She did not lunge at Proculus. She turned the blade inward, driving it toward her own breast. "No!" Proculus shouted. The calm vanished. He moved faster than I thought a human could move. He didn't strike her. He tackled her. He caught her wrist mid-air, twisting it with a brutal efficiency that forced a gasp of pain from her lips. The dagger clattered to the stone floor, skittering away into the shadows. "You are not permitted to die," Proculus hissed, his face inches from hers. He pinned her arms behind her back, pressing her against the cold wall. "Caesar has plans for you. You are his prize. Do not damage the merchandise." The merchandise. I watched, paralyzed with horror. They were handling the living goddess Isis like a thief caught in the market. 2 other soldiers moved forward to restrain Iris and Charmian. They were rough, their hands heavy and unyielding. Then, a soldier turned his eyes to me. He was a brute of a man, with a jagged scar running from his ear to his chin, twisting his lip into a permanent sneer. He smelled of stale wine and unwashed wool. "And this one?" the scarred soldier grunted, stepping toward me. "Check her," Proculus ordered, not looking away from Cleopatra. "Search them all. No weapons, no poisons. Strip the room if you have to." Panic flared in my chest. It wasn't just fear for my life. In the sash of my tunic, hidden against my skin, was a small clay vial. It wasn't the poison the queen sought. That was hidden elsewhere, a secret I dared not think about. This was my own mixture, a concentrated sedative of poppy and hemlock I used to help the queen sleep during the worst nights of the war. It was enough to kill if taken all at once. If they found it, they would take it. And I knew, with a sudden crystal clarity, that I needed to keep it. Not for the queen, but for myself. Or perhaps simply to have one thing that belonged to me, one choice left in a world where choices were being stripped away. The scarred soldier grabbed my arm, yanking me up from the floor. His grip was bruising. "Get up, rat!" I stumbled, my hand instinctively going to my waist. He saw the movement. "What do you have there?" he growled. "Nothing," I squeaked, my voice betraying me. "Just a charm, an amulet for protection." He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. He shoved his hand into my sash. I bit my lip to keep from screaming. His rough fingers brushed against the clay vial. He pulled it out, holding it up to the flickering lamplight. "Looks like medicine," he sneered. He uncorked it, sniffing the contents. The bitter smell of poppy wafted out. He grimaced and tossed it back to me, losing interest. "Useless junk. Move." I caught the vial against my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs. I quickly shoved it into my sleeve, tying the fabric tight. I had saved it. A small victory, meaningless in the face of the tragedy unfolding, but it felt like holding a spark of fire in a storm. "Take them to the palace," Proculus commanded. "The queen goes to the secured chambers. Separate the servants. I want her isolated." "You cannot!" Cleopatra screamed. It was the first time she had spoken since the dagger fell. "I am the Queen of Egypt. I demand to be treated with the dignity of my station." Proculus looked at her, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something like pity in his eyes, not for her suffering, but for her delusion. "Your station," Proculus said softly. "Look at you." The queen looked down. Her robes were torn, revealing bruised skin. Her hair was a tangled mess. Her hands were still stained with Antony's blood. She looked wild, desperate, and utterly defeated. In contrast, Proculus stood in his polished armor, the embodiment of Roman order. The visual difference was a physical blow. The barbarian East versus the civilized West. That was the picture Octavian wanted the world to see. "You are a prisoner of Rome," Proculus stated, "and you will remain alive until Caesar decides otherwise." He signaled to his men. 2 soldiers grabbed Cleopatra by the arms. She didn't fight them physically anymore. She knew she was overpowered. Instead, she fought with her spirit. She planted her feet, forcing them to drag her. "Eleni!" she cried out, her eyes searching the room frantically until they found me. The scarred soldier was dragging me toward the door, away from her. I twisted in his grip, reaching out. "My queen," I sobbed. For a single heartbeat, time seemed to stop. Cleopatra's eyes locked onto mine. They were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and a fierce, burning command. In that look, she wasn't just seeing a servant girl. She was seeing a witness. "Remember this," her eyes seemed to say. "Do not look away." "You will not take me to Rome alive," she screamed, her voice echoing off the stone walls, bouncing down the corridor where the soldiers were dragging her. "You can take my body, but you will never have me. Kill me. Kill me now." Her screams were not of hysteria, but of defiance. She was begging for death as if it were a lover, preferring the cold embrace of the grave to the warm chains of Octavian. The soldiers laughed. One of them struck her across the mouth to silence her. Her head snapped back, but she did not stop struggling. "Move!" The scarred soldier shoved me through the doorway. The cool night air of the courtyard hit me, a stark contrast to the tomb. But it didn't smell like freedom. It smelled of ash. I looked back one last time. I saw the Queen of Egypt being hauled down the stairs like a sack of grain, her golden sandals scraping uselessly against the stone. The heavy wooden doors of the mausoleum slammed shut, sealing Antony inside with the silence. We were outside now. The foxes had entered the coop, and the slaughter had begun. But they hadn't killed the bird. They had clipped her wings. I clutched the vial in my sleeve, feeling its hard, cold surface against my wrist. I was crying, tears streaming down my face, blurring the torches of the Roman guards into streaks of fire. But beneath the tears, a cold resolve was forming, hardening like the clay in my hand. I was a witness, and I would keep my eyes open. The sun rose over Alexandria on the 2nd day of August, but it did not bring light. It only brought visibility to our ruin. We had been moved from the stone tomb to the palace of the Ptolemies. To anyone looking from the outside, it was a return to splendor. The floors were paved with alabaster that cooled the feet, the walls were painted with scenes of the Nile's abundance, and the air was perfumed with cedar and jasmine. But a cage, no matter how much gold you plate it with, remains a cage. I stood outside the heavy double doors of the Queen's chamber, holding a silver tray of figs and watered wine. I am Eleni, the ghost in the hallway, the girl whose hands shake so badly the cups rattle against the metal. "Halt!" a voice barked. It was a new guard. He was young, his face unscarred, but his eyes held the same dull indifference as the others. He did not look at me. He looked through me. "Arms out," he commanded. This was the new ritual. The ritual of the morning, the ritual of the evening, the ritual of every time I entered or left a room. I set the tray down on a small cedar table and lifted my arms. The search was not quick. It was slow, deliberate, and humiliating. His hands patted down my tunic, lingering over the sash, checking the hem, feeling through the thickness of my hair. He was looking for metal, for glass, for anything that could cut. I held my breath, my heart hammering against a small clay vial I still had hidden in the deep fold of my sleeve, stitched into the lining now. He missed it. He was looking for daggers, not powders. "Clean," he grunted, shoving me toward the door. "Go, and tell the witch to eat. Caesar dislikes wasted food." I picked up the tray and entered. The room was vast, a chamber fit for a goddess, but it had been stripped. The heavy bronze statues that could be toppled were gone. The silk cords that held back the drapes had been cut away, leaving the curtains to hang limp and shapeless. Cleopatra stood by the window. It was a narrow opening, high up, offering a sliver of the great harbor. She was still wearing the torn robes from the tomb, though someone had tried to clean the blood from the hem. "My queen," I whispered. She turned. The fire I had seen in the tomb, that desperate, screaming defiance, had cooled into something harder, like obsidian. But she looked smaller here. In the vastness of the palace, without her court, without her generals, she was just a woman standing in a room that was too big for her grief. Eros and Charmian were there, sitting on low stools. They looked like statues of mourning. Charmian's eyes were red-rimmed, swollen shut. "They took the fruit knife," Eros said, her voice flat. "We have to peel the figs with our fingers." I set the tray down. "I brought water, Majesty, and bread." Cleopatra looked at the food with revulsion. "Did they taste it, Eleni? Did they check for poison?" "Yes, Majesty." "Then they have taken even that choice from me," she murmured. She walked over to the vanity table. It was empty. The silver mirrors, the heavy combs, the jeweled pins, all gone. Suddenly, the doors swung open without a knock. There was no announcement, no "make way for the queen," just the intrusion of boots on marble. A man entered. He was not like the brute Proculus or the scarred soldier from the tomb. He was older, wearing a toga draped with the casual elegance of a Roman politician, though a sword hung at his hip. He had a face that might have been handsome, if not for the cruelty etched around his mouth. He was Cornelius Gallus, a poet, they said, a man of words. But in his eyes, I saw only numbers. "Good morning, Cleopatra," he said, using her name without a title. It was a calculated slight, stripping her of her divinity with a single word. Cleopatra straightened her spine. Even in rags, she summoned the phantom of her power. "You enter without permission." Gallus smiled, a thin, tight expression. "Permission is a luxury for the free. I am here to ensure your comfort and to collect contraband." He snapped his fingers. 2 guards stepped forward. They did not approach the furniture. They approached the queen. "We have reports," Gallus said softly, "that you still possess items that could be dangerous to your health. Caesar is very concerned for your safety." "I have nothing," Cleopatra said, her chin high. "Your dogs have taken everything." "Not everything." Gallus pointed a finger at her head. "The hairpins. Gold. Sharp enough to puncture a vein if one is desperate enough." I gasped. The pins were holding her hair, the last semblance of her royal dignity. To take them was to undress her. "They are just pins," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Take them," Gallus ordered. The guards moved in. Cleopatra flinched as rough hands reached for her head. I wanted to scream, to throw the tray at them, but I stood frozen. They pulled the long golden pins from her heavy dark hair, one by one. With each pin removed, a piece of her seemed to collapse. Her hair, unwashed and tangled, fell around her shoulders in a chaotic curtain. They didn't stop there. They checked the clasp of her tunic. They made her lift her sandals to check the soles. They treated her body not as a temple, but as a crime scene. When they were done, Gallus held the handful of gold pins, weighing them in his palm. "Much safer," he said. "Now, on to the matter of your children." The air in the room vanished. Cleopatra took a step forward, her hands clutching the empty air where her dagger used to be. "Where are they?" she demanded. "Where is Caesarion?" Gallus stepped closer, invading her personal space. "They are nearby. Caesarion is a charming boy, very much like his father. It would be a tragedy if the sins of the mother were to visit the son." "You promised their safety," she hissed. "Safety is conditional," Gallus replied, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent room. "Cooperation buys safety. Defiance buys accidents. Eat your food, Cleopatra. Keep your strength up. You have a long journey ahead of you." He turned and left, the guards trailing behind him. The door slammed shut, and the lock clicked, a sound of finality. Cleopatra stood trembling. The humiliation of the search had been painful, but the mention of Caesarion was the true blade. She sank to the floor, not on the couch, but on the cold alabaster. "He knows," she whispered to Iris. "He knows that is the only way to hold me." The day dragged on in a suffocating silence. The guards outside the door changed shifts, the clanking of armor marking the hours. We were in a bubble of stillness, isolated from the world. But as the sun began to set, painting the room in bruised purples and blood reds, the palace began to wake up. The acoustics of the Ptolemaic palace were legendary. The walls were designed to carry the whispers of conspirators and the music of feasts. Now those walls became instruments of torture. I was clearing the untouched food when I saw it. Cleopatra froze, her head tilted to the side, her eyes widening. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I listened. At first there was only the wind. Then, drifting through the high ventilation shafts, came a sound so faint it might have been a memory. Laughter. High-pitched, childish laughter. "It's Alexander," Cleopatra said, her voice breaking. "And Selene." She scrambled to the wall nearest the corridor. She pressed her face against the cold stone, her hands splayed out as if trying to push through the solid rock. "I hear them," she sobbed. "They are playing. They are right there." I crept closer. I could hear it too. The faint sound of a ball bouncing. The squeal of a girl. And then, the distinct crying voice of a younger child, Ptolemy, the little one. "Mama?" The voice was muffled, distant, distorted by the stone, but it was him. "I am here!" Cleopatra screamed at the wall. "Ptolemy! I am here!" She pounded on the stone with her fists. "Answer me! I am here!" But the walls did not answer. The laughter continued, indifferent to her screams. It was close enough to hear the joy in their voices, close enough to know they were alive, but separated by 5 feet of limestone that might as well have been an ocean. "Why won't they come to the door?" she cried, sliding down the wall until she was curled in a ball at the base. "Why do they keep them there?" I realized then the cruelty of the design. Octavian hadn't just separated them. He had placed them just out of reach. He wanted her to hear them. He wanted her to know that while she was rotting in this cage, life was continuing without her. He wanted her to feel the proximity of her heart, only to realize she had no hands to hold it. I looked at the Queen of Kings, the woman who had commanded armies. She was scratching at the stone with her fingernails, weeping softly, whispering names into the mortar. "Let me see them," she begged the empty room, just for a moment, just to know they are real. But the only response was the fading sound of laughter as the children were led away down the hall, leaving the room in a silence that was louder than any scream. I stood in the shadows, clutching my own arms, feeling the phantom weight of the vial in my sleeve. I looked at the queen, stripped of her crown, stripped of her pins, stripped of her dignity, and now, being stripped of her sanity. This was not a prison. It was a breaking wheel, and the turning had only just begun. The 4th day of August began not with the clang of swords, but with the scratching of a stylus on wax. The silence that had settled over the chamber after the children's laughter faded was broken by a polite, rhythmic knocking. Before I could even move to the door, it was pushed open. They were not soldiers. They did not wear the lorica segmentata or carry the heavy shields of the legions. These men wore simple tunics, their hands stained with ink and chalk. Their belts hung not with gladi, but with measuring rods, coils of knotted rope, and calipers. There were 3 of them. Leading them was a man named Atticus. He was tall, gaunt, with eyes that looked at the world as if it were a geometry problem waiting to be solved. He did not look at Cleopatra as a man looks at a woman, or even as a subject looks at a ruler. He looked at her as a carpenter looks at a stack of lumber. "Light," Atticus commanded, snapping his fingers at his assistants. They moved the heavy furniture aside, clearing the center of the room. They set up a tripod with a hanging plumb line. Cleopatra sat on the edge of her bed, her back rigid. She looked at me, confusion warring with her exhaustion. "Who are these men, Eleni? Are they executioners?" I didn't know. But when Atticus turned to her, holding a long strip of marked leather, the fear in my stomach turned into something colder. "Stand up," Atticus said. His voice was dry, devoid of malice, devoid of anything human. The queen did not move. "I am Cleopatra Philopater. You will address me as no, stand up." He didn't shout. He simply stated it as a necessary step in a process. Two guards by the door took a step forward, their hands on their hilts. Cleopatra stood. She smoothed the folds of her torn linen dress. She raised her chin, summoning the dignity of 50 generations of Ptolemies. Atticus nodded to his assistant, a younger man with a nervous twitch named Lucius, who held a wax tablet and a bronze stylus. "Height!" Atticus droned. He walked up to the queen, stepping into her personal space without a flicker of hesitation. He placed the rod against her back, forcing her to straighten. 5 feet, 2 inches. Note that down. The platform will need to be raised by 3 cubits for the crowd in the back rows to see her clearly. The crowd. The word hung in the air like a poisonous vapor. "Arm span," Atticus continued. He grabbed Cleopatra's wrist. His fingers were rough, callous. He lifted her arm out to the side. She resisted, her muscles locking. "Relax the limb," Atticus sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn door hinge. "If you fight, the measurements will be wrong, and the shackles will chafe. Caesar prefers the merchandise to arrive undamaged." He pulled her arms wide, measuring from fingertip to fingertip. The queen stood in the center of the room, her arms splayed in a mock crucifixion. "Shoulder width," Atticus called out. "Neck circumference." He took a loop of rope and wrapped it around her throat. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. I thought he was going to strangle her. I thought this was the end. But he only pulled it taut, checking the size, his thumb resting casually against her pulse. "Slender," he muttered to Lucius. "The standard iron collar will be too loose. It will look comical. We need a custom casting. Bronze, perhaps gilded. It needs to catch the sun when she walks up the Via Sacra." They were talking about the triumph. I had heard stories of the Roman triumphs. They were the heartbeat of the empire's cruelty, a parade of stolen gold, exotic beasts and conquered kings, marching through the sweltering heat of Rome to the temple of Jupiter. And at the end of the march, while the crowd cheered and the general offered a bull to the gods, the enemy leader was traditionally strangled in the darkness of the Tullianum prison. "Waist," Atticus ordered. He wrapped the tape around her midsection. "She has lost weight. The chains will need to be adjustable. If she starves herself further on the voyage, we don't want the manacles slipping off." Cleopatra had gone somewhere else. I could see it in her eyes. The fire was gone, replaced by a glassy, vacant stare. She had turned herself into stone. If they were going to treat her like a statue, she would become one. She stared at a spot on the wall, unblinking, while these men touched her, turned her, and discussed the mechanics of her humiliation. "What about the stride?" Lucius asked, looking up from his tablet. "The chains on the ankles, how much slack?" Atticus looked at Cleopatra's legs. "Short steps. It implies submission. 12 inches of chain between the ankles. Enough to walk, not enough to run. And it creates a pleasing sound. Clink, drag, clink, drag. The mob loves that sound. They spent hours in the room. They returned the next day and the day after that. It was a slow, bureaucratic torture. On the 5th day, they brought sketches. They didn't show them to the queen. They laid them on the table. discussing them as if she were deaf. I peeked at the wax tablets. They were drawings of a cage, a wooden structure, open on all sides, mounted on a cart. Inside the drawing, a small stick figure stood, holding out its hands in supplication. The structure needs to be sturdy, Atticus explained to the guards. The voyage to Rome is long. Salt air, rough seas. We are building it now in the harbor. We need to make sure she fits inside with the accessories. Accessories? The guard asked. The effigy, Atticus replied. If she dies before the parade, we have a wax statue being commissioned. But Caesar wants the living woman, the breathing trophy. The cage is designed to force her to stand upright. No sitting, no hiding. The people of Rome must see the witch who seduced their general. I looked at Cleopatra. She was standing by the window, her back to them. Her shoulders were shaking, a vibration so slight it was almost invisible. And the children? Lucius asked. Do we measure them? Tomorrow, Atticus said. Caesarion is tall for his age. He will walk behind her. The twins are smaller. They might need to be carried in a separate litter if the heat is too much. We don't want them fainting before the execution site. Execution site? They said it so casually, as if discussing the weather. When they finally packed up their tools on the evening of the 6th day, the sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the alabaster floor. We have what we need, Atticus announced. He looked at Cleopatra one last time, not with pity, but with professional satisfaction. The structure will be ready for your departure in 3 days. Try to eat Egyptian. A starving prisoner looks like a victim. Caesar wants you to look like a monster we have tamed. They left. The door clicked shut. The lock turned. The silence rushed back in, but it was different now. It was no longer the silence of isolation. It was the silence of a tomb that had been measured for a coffin. Cleopatra stood in the center of the room for a long time. She did not move. She did not blink. Majesty, I whispered, stepping out of the shadows. She turned slowly. Her face was pale, her skin looking like the wax of the tablets they had used to record her dimensions. They measured my neck, Eleni, she whispered. Her voice was thin, brittle as dried papyrus. For the collar. She took a step toward me and stumbled. I ran to her, catching her before she hit the floor. We sank down together onto the cold stone. For the first time since Antony died, she didn't scream. She didn't rage. She simply collapsed. She buried her face in my shoulder, her fingers digging into my tunic, clutching me as if I were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. They are building it, she sobbed, the words muffled against my chest. I saw the drawing, a cage, a wooden cage on wheels. I held her. I, a slave, holding the Pharaoh of Egypt. There was no protocol left. There was only terror. They will drag me through the streets, she wept. They will throw fruit. They will spit. And my children, my beautiful children, they will walk behind me and watch their mother be a dog on a leash. Her body shook with violent tremors. It was the shaking of an animal that realizes the trap has no exit. I cannot do it, she gasped, lifting her head to look at me. Her eyes were red, wild, pleading. I cannot be that thing in the cage. I cannot let them see me like that. Not after I was a goddess. She gripped my arms, her nails biting into my skin. They think they have won because they took my dagger, she hissed, a sudden terrifying clarity returning to her gaze. They think they own my body because they measured it. But they forgot one thing, Eleni. What, my lady? I asked, my tears mixing with the dust on her cheek. They measured a prisoner, she said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. They did not measure a soul. She pulled away from me, wiping her face with the back of her hand. The vulnerability was being walled up again. brick by brick. But the humiliation of the last 3 days had changed her. The hope of negotiation was gone. The delusion of survival was gone. "They are building a cage," she said to the empty room, "but they will find it empty." The 7th day of August brought a silence deeper than the tomb we had left behind. For 3 days, no food had passed the queen's lips. The silver trays brought by the guards piled up near the door, a monument to rot. The figs turned brown and soft, weeping their sticky juice onto the silver. The bread grew stale and hard as stone. The wine turned to vinegar in the heat. The smell of spoiling luxury filled the room, a sickly sweet scent of decay that clung to the back of the throat. Cleopatra sat in the center of the room on a low stool. She had stopped moving. She had stopped pacing. She had even stopped looking at the window where the children's laughter had once drifted in. She was withdrawing from the world, cell by cell. Her skin, once the color of honey and oiled with myrrh, was now papery and gray. Her lips were cracked. I, Eleni, sat at her feet, wetting a cloth to dab at her forehead. She was burning with the fever of starvation, yet her hands were cold as ice. "Majesty," I whispered, holding a cup of water. "Just a sip, please." She did not open her eyes. "Let me go, Eleni. It is the only road left." The guards were nervous. I could hear their whispers through the door. They were terrified. If Cleopatra died of starvation, there would be no triumph. There would be no living trophy for Octavian. Their orders were to keep her alive, and they were failing against a weapon they could not confiscate: her own will. Around the 3rd hour, the heavy bolt of the door slid back with a violence that made me jump. It was not the architects. It was not the servants with more unwanted food. A phalanx of soldiers entered, their armor clattering. They did not look at the queen. They formed 2 lines, creating a corridor from the door to the center of the room. They stood at attention, hands on their gladi, faces like stone. Then, a figure walked between them. He was 17 years old, on the cusp of manhood, but in that moment he looked like a frightened child. He was tall, with the sharp, aristocratic nose of the Julian line and the dark, soulful eyes of the Ptolemies. He wore a Roman tunic, but it hung loosely on his frame, as if he had shrunk inside it. It was Caesarion, Ptolemy XIII, the King of Kings, the son of Julius Caesar. Cleopatra's eyes flew open. The lethargy of starvation vanished in a heartbeat. She tried to stand, her legs trembling under her weight, but she stumbled. "Caesarion!" Her voice was a rasp, a broken sound. She reached out, her fingers clawing at the air. The boy took a step forward, his face twisting in anguish. "Mother!" He moved to rush to her, but a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. It was the captain of the guard, a man with eyes like flint. He held the boy back, just out of reach. "No touching," the captain barked. "Talk, that is all." Caesarion froze. He looked at the hand on his shoulder, then at the soldiers lining the room. He understood the geometry of the trap perfectly. He was not here as a son, he was here as a lever. Cleopatra sank back onto her stool, her chest heaving. "What have they done to you? Are you hurt?" "I am well, mother," Caesarion said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the rehearsal in it. I could hear the script he had been forced to memorize. "They treat me with respect, as befits my father's son." He looked at the rotting food by the door, then back at his mother's gaunt face. Tears began to pool in his dark eyes, spilling over to track through the dust on his cheeks. "Mother, please," he said, and the script shattered. The rehearsal fell away, leaving only raw terror. "They told me you are dying. They told me you refuse to eat." "I cannot live in a cage, my heart," she whispered. "I cannot let them turn us into monsters for their amusement." "But if you die?" Caesarion's voice cracked. He took a step closer, ignoring the guard's grip tightening on his shoulder. "If you die," they said there is no reason for me to remain in Alexandria. They said my safety depends on your cooperation." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the checkmate. Octavian wasn't just threatening to kill him, he was putting the burden of his survival directly onto Cleopatra's plate. If she starved herself to save her dignity, she was signing her son's death warrant. Her death would not be a noble sacrifice. It would be the murder of her firstborn. Cleopatra looked at him. She looked at the son she had born to the greatest man in the world, the boy she had dreamed would unite East and West. Now, he was just a terrified hostage, begging his mother to live so that he might draw breath for one more day. The fight went out of her. It didn't explode, it evaporated. Her shoulders slumped. The fierce light in her eyes dulled into a flat, dead acceptance. "Eleni," she said. Her voice was unrecognizable. "Bring the food." I scrambled to my feet. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the bowl. I found a bowl of grain porridge that was still warm, brought by the last shift. I grabbed a spoon. I knelt beside her. The guards did not leave. They watched. They counted. They needed to witness the surrender. Caesarion stood there, his chest heaving, watching his mother. I dipped the spoon into the porridge. "Open, my lady," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. Cleopatra opened her mouth. It was the action of a fledgling bird, blind and helpless. I placed the spoon between her lips. She swallowed. The sound of her swallowing was loud in the silent room. One. The captain of the guard nodded slightly. I dipped the spoon again. My tears fell, hot and salty, landing in the porridge. I was feeding her humiliation. I was feeding her defeat. With every spoonful, I was keeping her alive for the cage they had built. 2. She ate mechanically. Her eyes never left Caesarion's face. She was memorizing him. She was drinking in the slope of his jaw, the curl of his hair, the way his hands clenched at his sides. She was eating to keep the sword from his neck. "Good," Caesarion whispered, his voice trembling. "Please, mother, eat for me." I fed her until the bowl was half empty. She did not gag. She did not cry. She simply absorbed the nourishment as a prisoner absorbs a sentence. "Enough," the captain barked. He pulled Caesarion back. "The agreement is met." "Wait!" Cleopatra cried, the spoon clattering to the floor as she reached out. "Let me hold him, just for a moment." "That was not in the agreement," the captain said coldly. He spun the boy around. "Mother!" Caesarion shouted, twisting in the guard's grip. He looked back over his shoulder, his eyes wide with panic and love. "I love you. I will be brave." "Caesarion." They dragged him out. The door slammed shut. The bolt slid home. Cleopatra sat frozen, her hand still reaching out toward the empty space where her son had stood. The room was suddenly vast, empty, and terrifyingly quiet. She looked at the half-eaten bowl of porridge on the floor. She looked at me, her eyes hollow. "He is thinner," she whispered. "Did you see, Eleni? His wrists. They are so thin." "He is alive, Majesty," I said, my voice thick with grief. "You saved him today." "I bought him time," she corrected. She wiped a crumb of grain from her lip, a gesture of terrible finality. "I sold my death to buy him days. But did you see his eyes, Eleni?" She turned to me, and the look on her face chilled my blood. It was not the look of a woman who had hope. It was the look of a woman who had seen the truth. "He knows," she said softly. "He knows he is walking to his grave. He just wanted to say goodbye." She picked up the bowl herself. Her hands were steady now, not with strength, but with the terrifying calm of someone who has no choices left. She raised the bowl to her lips and drank the rest of the porridge, slurry and tears and all. She wasn't eating for life anymore. She was eating for the strength to finish what had to be done. The guards outside relaxed. I could hear their laughter return. They thought they had won. They thought the queen was broken, that the hunger strike was a tantrum that had passed. But I sat on the cold floor, watching the woman who had once been a goddess lick the spoon clean. And I knew the truth. They hadn't broken her will to die. They had only forced her to change the method. She would not starve. That was too slow. That endangered the boy. She needed something faster, something immediate, something that could not be stopped once it began. "Clear the tray, Eleni," she said, her voice dead. "And bring me fresh water. We must prepare for the visitor." "Visitor, Majesty?" "Octavian," she said. "He will come now that he thinks I am on my knees." The 8th day of August brought the architect of our ruin to the door. He did not come with the clamor of trumpets or the march of legions. He came with the silence of a creeping frost. The guards outside straightened their tunics, their usual coarse jokes dying in their throats. The heavy bolt slid back, not with a clang, but with a respectful hush. "Caesar is here," a voice announced. I, Eleni, was scrubbing the floor near the balcony, trying to remove a stain of spilled wine that looked too much like blood. At the announcement, I froze. The queen was seated on her couch, dressed in a fresh robe of white linen, the only clean thing left in the room. She had brushed her hair herself, pulling it back simply, without the gold pins they had stolen. She looked at me, her eyes dark and unreadable. "Behind the curtain, Eleni. Be invisible. But listen." I scrambled behind the heavy drapes that flanked the balcony doors. I pressed myself into the corner, finding a small gap in the fabric where I could see into the room. Octavian entered. I had expected a giant. I had expected a monster with fangs, a warrior scarred by battle like Antony. But the man who walked into the room was terrifyingly ordinary. He was young, barely 30, with a pale, sickly complexion and hair the color of dirty straw. He was not tall. He wore a toga of simple wool, draped with precise, calculated modesty. But his eyes, they were pale blue, cold and flat as a winter sea. They were eyes that had never wept, never laughed, never widened in surprise. They were the eyes of a man who did not see people. He saw only obstacles and assets. He dismissed his guards with a flick of his wrist. They retreated, leaving the door slightly ajar. "Cleopatra," he said. His voice was soft, cultured, lacking the rough cadence of a soldier. It was the voice of the Senate floor, reasonable and deadly. The queen rose slowly. She did not stand tall as the Pharaoh. She rounded her shoulders, lowered her head. She made herself small. She made herself look like exactly what he wanted to see. A broken woman. "Caesar," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You honor this prison." "It is not a prison," Octavian corrected gently, walking around the room, inspecting the furniture as if he were thinking of buying it. "It is a guest chamber. We merely ensure your safety until we can welcome you to Rome." He stopped in front of her. He did not touch her. He seemed to shrink from physical contact, as if her foreignness were a contagion. "I am told you have eaten," he said. "That is good. Suicide is untidy. It does not become a queen of your stature." "I ate for my son," Cleopatra said, raising her eyes to his for a fleeting second before looking down again. "I ate because I wish to live." "And live you shall," Octavian smiled. It was a tight, practiced expression that did not reach his eyes. "I have a proposition, a way to ensure the prosperity of your line." I held my breath. This was the trap. "Walk with me in Rome," Octavian said. "Walk in my triumph. Not in chains, I am not a barbarian, but as a guest of honor. Show the people that Egypt accepts the friendship of Rome. Show them that the war is truly over. And if I do this, Cleopatra asked. "If I endure the shame." "Then your children remain safe," Octavian replied smoothly. "Caesarion. He is a bright boy. I see much of his father in him. It would be a waste to let such potential wither. If you cooperate, he will be spared. He will be educated in Rome, treated as a prince. The twins too. They will have a future." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "But if you cheat me of my victory, if you harm yourself, then I cannot protect them. The Senate is unforgiving, Cleopatra. They will demand blood for the war you started. Only my personal intervention can save them." It was a lie. Even I, a slave girl hiding behind a curtain, could smell the rot in his words. He spoke of mercy while holding a knife to her children's throats. Cleopatra fell to her knees. It was a shocking sight. The Queen of Kings kneeling before this pale Roman boy. She grasped the hem of his toga, weeping. "I will do it," she sobbed. "I will walk. I will be your trophy. Just save him. Save my son." Octavian looked down at her with a flicker of distaste, pulling his hem away gently. He believed her. He saw a woman destroyed by grief, clinging to motherhood as her last raft. He saw his victory absolute. "Good," he said. "We sail in 3 days. Prepare yourself." "Grant me one kindness, Lord." Cleopatra wept, still on the floor. "Let me visit Antony. Let me pour libations on his tomb one last time before I leave Egypt forever. Let me say goodbye to my past, so I can face the future you offer." Octavian considered this. He was a man who understood symbols. Allowing a grieving widow a final rite would make him look magnanimous. It would keep her calm. "Granted," he said. "Tomorrow, but under guard." He turned and left without looking back. As soon as the door clicked shut, the weeping stopped. Cleopatra stood up. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The broken posture vanished. The tears dried. Her face hardened into a mask of cold fury. She wiped her hands on her robe as if she had touched something filthy. "Did you hear him, Eleni?" she hissed, staring at the closed door. "Did you hear the snake hiss?" I stepped out from the curtain, trembling. "He promised safety, Majesty." "He promised nothing," she spat. "He offered me a cage and called it a palace. He looked at me and saw a foolish woman. He does not know I can read the lies in a man's eyes as easily as I read a scroll." She began to pace, the energy returning to her limbs. "He will never let Caesarion live," she whispered to the empty room. "He cannot. Caesarion is the true heir of Julius Caesar. Octavian is just a grandnephew with a stolen name. As long as my son breathes, Octavian is a usurper. He will smile, he will parade us, and then, when the crowds have gone home, he will strangle my son in the dark." The next 2 days passed in a strange, suspended tension. The guards, believing the queen had submitted, relaxed their vigilance. They no longer checked the food trays with the same paranoia. They stopped searching my hair every time I entered. They saw us as defeated women, harmless and preparing for a journey. This was the mistake Cleopatra had played for. On the night of August 10th, the air in the chamber was stiflingly hot. The generosity of Caesar had allowed some comforts to return. A basket of clean linen, a jar of oil, and placed on the small table by a sympathetic servant who remembered the old days, a large bouquet of blue lotuses. The guards had laughed at the flowers. "Let her have them," one had said. "Funerals need flowers." I was arranging the blooms in a vase when I felt something stiff hidden among the wet stems. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the door. The guard's shadow was motionless. He was likely dozing in the heat. I pulled it out. It was not a scroll, but a small, tightly folded strip of papyrus, wrapped in a lotus leaf to keep it dry. It bore no seal. "Majesty," I whispered. Cleopatra was by the window, watching the stars. She turned, and when she saw what was in my hand, she crossed the room in 2 strides. She took the note. Her hands did not shake. She unfolded it near the lamp. It was short. A single line of text, written in Greek, in a hand I did not recognize, perhaps a spy, perhaps a friend in Octavian's own camp who had been bought with the last of her hidden gold. She read it. The silence that followed was different from the others. It was not the silence of grief or fear. It was the silence of a blade being drawn from a sheath. She held the papyrus over the flame of the lamp. We watched as the fire curled the edges, turning the words to ash. "What did it say, my lady?" I asked, my voice barely a breath. She watched the last ember die before looking at me. Her eyes were clear, terrifyingly calm. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. "It confirmed what I already knew," she said softly. "Caesarion is to be sent to India, they told me. But the orders have already been given to the cavalry. He is to be intercepted on the road. He will never reach the port." She turned back to the window, looking out toward the darkness where her son was being held. "Octavian thinks he is a god," she whispered. "He thinks he can arrange the world like pieces on a board. He thinks he can make me walk in his parade and then kill my bloodline while I watch." She turned to me, and a smile touched her lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a pharaoh who has decided to declare war on the gods themselves. "He wants a show, Eleni. He wants a spectacle for Rome, but he has forgotten that I am the playwright of my own life." She walked to the chest where her ceremonial robes, the few that remained, were kept. "Tomorrow we go to Antony's tomb," she said. Her voice rang with a new authority. "He granted me permission to say goodbye. I will use it." "To say goodbye to the general?" I asked. "No," she said, her eyes burning with a cold blue fire. "To retrieve the only thing that can save us. The guards are lax, Eleni. They think they are guarding sheep. They do not know there is still a cobra in the room." She placed a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was firm. "Rest tonight, little one. Tomorrow we steal the victory from the hands of Rome. Tomorrow we teach Octavian that some things cannot be chained." I looked at the pile of ash on the table. The message was gone, but its truth had set us on a path from which there was no return. The deal with the devil was broken. The time for negotiation was over. The time for the snake had come. The 11th day of August was a day of blinding white heat. The sun beat down on the limestone pavements of Alexandria, bleaching the color from the world. But inside the queen's heart, a cool, dark resolve had settled. "We are ready," Cleopatra said. The permission from Octavian had come early in the morning. He was feeling generous, the arrogance of a man who believes he has already won. He allowed the Queen of Egypt to visit the tomb of her fallen lover, Mark Antony, under heavy guard. He thought she was going to weep. He thought she was going to say goodbye. He did not know she was going to the armory. I, Eleni, walked a pace behind her as we were marched across the courtyard. The guards were lax, their tunics unbuttoned in the heat, their eyes wandering. They saw a broken woman in a mourning veil and a servant girl carrying a basket of offerings. They did not see the tension in the queen's shoulders. The tomb was silent. The smell of death was faint now, replaced by the scent of the incense we had burned 10 days ago. The blood on the floor had dried to a dark, rust-colored stain. Cleopatra knelt before the sarcophagus. The guards stood at the entrance, chatting about the dice game they would play later. They gave her privacy, not out of respect, but out of boredom. "Cover me, Eleni," she whispered. I moved to block the line of sight from the door, pretending to arrange the flowers we had brought. Behind the screen of my body, Cleopatra did not pray. She moved to the rear wall of the chamber, to a small niche where a statue of Osiris stood. Her hands, steady as stone, felt along the masonry behind the statue. There was a soft click of stone on stone. She pulled out not a weapon, and certainly not a snake. The stories that would be told later of a peasant bringing a cobra in a basket were the fancies of Roman playwrights who needed a dramatic monster to explain a dramatic woman. A cobra is heavy. A cobra is unreliable. A cobra bites only when provoked, and its venom is an agony of slow suffocation. Cleopatra was a scholar of poisons. She would never trust her dignity to a frightened animal. What she pulled from the wall was a small hairpin. It was hollow, capped with wax. Inside was a mixture she had prepared months ago, testing it on condemned prisoners to ensure its efficacy. A blend of wolfsbane, opium, and hemlock. Sleep, she had told me once, followed by the stopping of the heart. She slipped the pin into her hair. "It is done," she said, rising. She turned to the sarcophagus and kissed the cold stone. "Wait for me, Antony. I will not be long." We returned to the palace in the early afternoon. The heat was stifling. "I hunger," Cleopatra announced to the guards at her door. "Bring me fruit, figs, the dark ones." The guards smirked. The hunger strike was truly over, they thought. A peasant arrived an hour later with a basket of large, ripe figs covered by palm leaves. The guard, a suspicious man named Titus, burly, with a nose broken in 3 places, stopped him. "Hold!" Titus grunted. He lifted the leaves. He poked through the figs with the tip of his dagger. He shook the basket. "Check for snakes," his companion laughed. "She likes the exotic ones." Titus overturned the top layer. Nothing but fruit. He grabbed a fig, bit into it, and chewed noisily, juice running down his chin. "Sweet, let it through." They let the basket pass. They felt clever. They had checked for the monster, but the poison was already in the room, woven into the queen's hair. Once the door was bolted, the atmosphere in the chamber shifted instantly. The air of defeat vanished. "Prepare the bath, Eleni," Cleopatra commanded, "and bring the chest, the red one." For the next hour the room became a temple. Iras and Charmian, moving with the solemn grace of priestesses, filled the bronze tub with water and scented oils, nard, cinnamon, and myrrh. I scrubbed the queen's skin. I washed away the dust of the tomb. I washed away the phantom touch of the architect's measuring tape. I washed away the invisible fingerprints of Octavian. When she stepped out of the water, she was no longer the prisoner. "Dress me," she said. We didn't put her in the simple tunics she had worn for 10 days. We opened the red chest. From it we pulled the regalia of the goddess Isis. The robe was of sheer linen, woven with threads of gold that caught the dying light of the afternoon sun. We placed the heavy collar of lapis lazuli and carnelian around her neck. We fastened the cuffs of beaten gold on her wrists. Charmian combed her hair, piling it high, and placed the diadem of the Ptolemies upon her head. The broad white ribbon intertwined with the golden uraeus, the rearing cobra that symbolized sovereignty over life and death. She sat on the golden couch, a vision of terrifying beauty. She was 39 years old, but in that moment she was ageless. She was Egypt. "Write," she told Iras. Iras took the wax tablet. Cleopatra dictated a letter to Octavian. It was brief. It did not beg. It did not apologize. It simply requested that she be buried side by side with Mark Antony. It was the final strike. By reading that request, Octavian would know he had lost. He would know she was dead before he could even reach the room. When the letter was sealed, Cleopatra turned to me. "Eleni." I stepped forward, my vision blurring with tears. "My queen." She reached under the couch and pulled out a small box made of cedar wood, inlaid with mother of pearl. It was the box I had seen her writing in during the long nights of the siege. "You will not drink the cup tonight," she said. My heart stopped. No, Majesty. I go where you go. I cannot stay here. You must, she said, her voice hard as diamond. Octavian will write this story if you do not. He will say I died of cowardice. He will say I died a whore. He will make a statue of me with a snake and parade it, and the world will believe the lie. She pressed the box into my hands. In here is the truth. My journals, the records of what they did to us, the measurements, the threats against Caesarion, the 10 days of torture. She gripped my chin, forcing me to look into her eyes. You are small, Eleni. You are a shadow. When the soldiers break down that door, there will be chaos. They will look at the gold. They will look at the queen. They will not look at the slave girl slipping out the service entrance. Majesty, I sobbed. Go to the harbor, she commanded. There is a merchant ship, the Stella Maris. The captain owes me a life. Show him this ring. She slipped a small signet ring from her finger and pressed it into my palm. Go, live, and one day, when Rome is dust, tell them who I really was. She kissed my forehead. It was a benediction and a dismissal. Now go. Hide in the alcove near the door. Wait for the shouting. I retreated to the shadows, clutching the box to my chest, my heart breaking into 1,000 shards. Cleopatra turned to Iris and Charmian. Are you ready, my sisters? We are ready, Iris said, her voice steady. Cleopatra pulled the hollow pin from her hair. She broke the wax seal. She poured the dark liquid into a goblet of wine. She swirled it gently. Iris drank first. She did not hesitate. She kissed the queen's hand, lay down at the foot of the couch, and within moments her breathing slowed. She fell asleep, a peaceful, heavy sleep from which she would not wake. Then Cleopatra raised the cup. To the victory that looks like defeat, she whispered. She drank. She did not convulse. She did not scream. The poison was a masterpiece of her chemistry. She simply lay back on the golden cushions, arranging her robe so that she lay in the pose of a statue. She crossed her hands over her chest, holding the crook and flail of the Pharaoh. The room was silent, save for the buzzing of a single fly near the basket of figs. The queen's eyes grew heavy. The tension left her face, smoothing the lines of worry and grief, leaving only the serene mask of divinity. Her chest rose and fell, slower, slower. Was this well done? Charmian whispered, her voice choking. Cleopatra's lips moved one last time, soundless, before the light faded from her eyes forever. Charmian, the last one left, took the cup. She drank the dregs, but she did not lie down. She stood by the head of the couch, swaying as the drug took hold of her limbs. She looked at the queen. The diadem had slipped slightly to the left during the final breath. With trembling hands, fighting the encroaching darkness, Charmian reached out. She adjusted the golden cobra. She straightened the white ribbon. She smoothed a stray lock of hair. Perfect, Charmian whispered. Then the heavy boots hammered against the door. Open up! Message from Caesar! The door burst open. The wood splintered. The guards rushed in, swords drawn, expecting a fight. They stopped dead. They saw the golden couch. They saw the 2 dead women. They saw Charmian swaying on her feet, holding onto the queen's crown. What have you done? The guard Titus roared, rushing forward. Was this well done, woman? Charmian looked at him, her eyes glazing over, but her head held high. Extremely well, she gasped, her voice echoing in the sudden silence. And fitting for a descendant of so many kings. She collapsed. The room erupted into chaos. Soldiers were shouting, overturning tables, checking for a pulse that wasn't there. Proculus rushed in, his face pale with the realization of his failure. The snake! Someone shouted. Find the snake! They began slashing at the basket of figs, overturning the furniture, hunting for a monster that didn't exist. In the confusion, in the swirl of shouting men and clattering armor, nobody looked at the shadows by the door. I gripped the cedar box. I took one last look at my queen, shining like the sun on her golden bed, untouchable, unmeasurable, free. I turned, and I ran. The corridors of the Ptolemaic palace were a labyrinth of panic. Behind me, the shouts of the Roman guards echoed off the marble walls, a cacophony of confusion and rage. Dead! They are all dead! Find the physician! Block the exits! But they were looking for soldiers. They were looking for assassins. They were not looking for a small girl in a coarse gray tunic, clutching a cedar box to her chest as if it contained the ashes of a god. I ran. My bare feet made no sound on the cool stone. I knew these hallways better than the Romans ever would. I knew the servants' passages, the narrow slivers of space between the grand chambers where the slaves moved like blood in the veins of a giant beast. I slipped out through the scullery doors, past the startled cooks who were still arguing over the untouched feast. I burst into the blinding afternoon heat of the courtyard, keeping my head down, blending into the frantic movement of the household staff. "The Queen!" someone screamed from a balcony above. "The Queen has fallen!" The cry rippled through the palace grounds like a shock wave. Servants dropped their burdens. Guards abandoned their posts to run toward the royal wing. In the center of the storm, I found the eye, the moment of absolute distraction Cleopatra had promised me. I reached the service gate. The guard there, a young auxiliary whose face was pale with the rumors already spreading, barely glanced at me. "Move along, girl," he stammered, his eyes fixed on the palace windows. "Go home. It's over." It is not over, I thought, my fingers digging into the wood of the box. It is just beginning. I ran until the smell of jasmine and cedar was replaced by the stench of tar, brine, and rotting fish. The great harbor of Alexandria stretched out before me, a forest of masts and sails. The Stella Maris was docked at the far end of the merchant pier, a modest Phoenician trading vessel that smelled of spices and wet timber. I found the captain arguing with a dockmaster. Captain Barca was a man carved from teak wood, with skin leathery from the sun and a beard braided with silver beads. He looked at me, at the signet ring I shoved into his calloused palm, and his eyes widened. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for the gold that was usually required for passage. He looked at the ring, the royal seal of the Ptolemies, and then looked back toward the palace, where a black flag was slowly being raised. "Get below," Barca grunted, his voice rough as grinding stones. "We sail with the tide, and the tide is now." As the ship pulled away from the quay, I hid behind a stack of amphorae on the deck. I watched the lighthouse of Pharaoh, that wonder of the world, catch the last light of the setting sun. Alexandria, the city of knowledge, the city of light, was shrinking. I did not cry. I had left my tears in the room with the figs. Now I had a job to do. We sailed south, then east, chasing the horizon. News travels slower than ships, but it travels. In the ports where we docked, Joppa, Tyre, and eventually the distant harbors of the Red Sea, I heard the stories. They were told by sailors in taverns, by merchants in the markets, distorted by distance but carrying the kernel of truth. I heard of Octavian's rage. They said when he entered the room and saw his prize snatched away by death, he did not grieve. He threw a chair across the chamber. He called for Psyle, snake charmers who could suck poison from wounds, but it was too late. The queen was cold. I heard of the triumph in Rome. It happened months later. I was safe by then, living in a small village on the coast of Africa, far beyond the reach of Roman tax collectors. But a traveler from Rome brought the tale. "It was a grand parade," the traveler said, wiping foam from his lips. "Gold, silver, prisoners in chains. The children were there, the twins walking quietly. But the crowd was waiting for her. And, I asked, pouring him more wine, my hand steady. She wasn't there, of course, the man laughed. So Octavian built a doll, a massive wax statue of the queen, lying on a bed, with a mechanical snake attached to her arm. He paraded a puppet through the streets. The traveler laughed, but his eyes were not merry. But you know, the people didn't cheer, they stared. There was no glory in defeating a wax doll. Octavian looked foolish. He wanted to show he conquered a monster, but he only showed that he was afraid of a ghost. I smiled then, a small, secret smile. The snake, I thought. He is still telling the story of the snake. He needs the monster because he cannot admit he was beaten by a hairpin and a woman's will. I touched the cedar box hidden beneath the floorboards of my hut. The statue was a lie. The truth was sleeping under my feet. 50 years is a long time. It is enough time for an empire to rise, for a face to wrinkle, for hair to turn the color of sea foam. I am an old woman now. My back is bent, and my hands, once steady enough to mix poisons, now tremble when I pour tea. We live in a house of white stone overlooking a turquoise sea, far from Egypt, in a land where the legions of Rome are just a rumor to frighten children. Nana, the voice belongs to Lydia, my granddaughter. She is 14, the same age I was when I hid in the tomb. She has the dark eyes of her father, but her spirit is all fire. She sat on the rug, pointing to the shelf where the cedar box had rested for half a century. I had never opened it in her presence. "What is inside?" she asked. "Is it treasure? Is it gold from the lost queens?" I looked at her. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of purple and gold, just as it had on that final day in the palace. "Bring it here, child," I said. Lydia brought the box. The mother-of-pearl inlay was yellowed with age, the wood smooth from my touch. "People say you were a slave," Lydia said softly. "They say you ran away with stolen jewels." "People say many things," I replied. "History is written by the men who win battles, Lydia. But the truth is often hidden in the silence of women." I opened the lid. The scent of cedar and old papyrus drifted out, a ghost of the past. There was no gold inside, no emeralds, no rubies. Lydia looked disappointed. "It's just paper?" I reached in and pulled out the scrolls. The papyrus was brittle, but the ink was still black. The handwriting was sharp, angular, defiant. The journals of Cleopatra Philopator, the record of the measurements, the transcripts of the threats, the detailed account of the psychological siege, and beneath the scrolls, a small, simple ring, the signet of Caesarion. "This," I said, unrolling the first scroll, "is a weapon more powerful than any sword Octavian ever carried. This is the story he tried to burn." I began to read to her. I read not of a seductress who bathed in milk, but of a scholar who spoke 9 languages. I read not of a witch who commanded snakes, but of a mother who bargained with her own life to buy her son a few more days of breath. I read of the architects with their measuring tapes, and the happy ending Octavian tried to sell to the world. Lydia listened, her eyes wide. The disappointment vanished, replaced by a dawning awe. "But Nana," she whispered when I finished, "she died. The Romans won. They took Egypt. They killed her son. How is this a victory?" I looked out at the sea. The stars were coming out, the same stars that had watched over the mausoleum. "They took her kingdom, yes," I said, stroking the girl's hair. "They took her life. But listen to me closely, Lydia. Power is not just about who rules the world. Power is about who owns your soul." I tapped the scroll. Octavian wanted to break her. He wanted to parade her as a broken thing, a pet on a leash, to prove that Rome could tame anything. He spent 10 days trying to steal her dignity. But in the end, he had to build a wax doll because the real woman refused to play his part. I handed the ring to Lydia. She held it reverently. "She chose how she lost," I said, my voice strong despite my age. And in that choice, she denied him the only thing he truly wanted, her submission. Lydia closed her hand around the ring. She was brave. She was free, I corrected. I leaned back in my chair. The burden I had carried for 50 years felt lighter. The truth was no longer mine alone. It had been passed on. It would live. Octavian was dead now. The Roman Empire was vast, but it was already starting to rot from the inside, eaten by its own greed. But here, on this quiet porch, the spirit of the last Pharaoh was alive. "Ho ja quop jivwong quach, giechetaksak," I whispered in the language of my youth. "Nhung kong bao gio quop juok suluachon koi kung kwaba ai." I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of the waves. I saw the golden room again. I saw the sun on the water. I saw Charmian adjusting the crown. And for the first time in a lifetime, I didn't see the tragedy. I saw the triumph. I smiled. And the sea breeze carried the story away, out into the world, where no cage could ever hold it. The story of Eleni and Cleopatra teaches us a profound truth that we can apply to our own lives. We cannot always control the storms that rage around us. We may face loss, injustice, or situations where we feel completely powerless. But there is one thing that no person and no circumstance can ever take away from you: your power to choose how you respond. True dignity is not given to us by others. It is something we build within ourselves. Even when the walls are closing in, you still hold the pen to write your own ending. If this story touched your heart, and you believe that the truth deserves to be remembered, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your interaction helps these forgotten voices rise above the silence of history. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a journey into the past. I pray that whatever battles you are fighting today, God grants you the unshakable strength to stand firm. May you find the courage to keep your head high when the world tries to bring you down. And may you always possess the wisdom to know that your value is defined by your own soul, not by the judgments of others. If you receive this strength and believe in your own resilience, write Amen in the comments below.